December 15, 1943, 1:47 p.m. San Pietro in Fine, Italy. Corporal Anthony Acevedo crouched behind the crumbling stone wall of the Chiesa di San Pietro, 300 yards from the nearest American position. 29 German soldiers moved through the olive grove below, advancing on the church where 42 wounded Americans lay waiting for evacuation. Acevedo had a Springfield rifle, 8 clips of ammunition and 4 grenades. No radio. No support. No chance. In the next 6 hours, this 23-year-old son of a Los Angeles mechanic would kill or wound every single German soldier who tried to take that church. The Japanese-American corporal, fighting with a segregated unit in Italy while his parents sat in an internment camp in Arizona, would hold a position that 3 German officers later testified should have fallen in 20 minutes. He'd do it using a tactic so unorthodox that the Army would classify his after-action report for 18 months, not because it contained secrets, but because it contradicted every principle of defensive doctrine taught at Fort Benning. What happened in that bell tower didn't follow the manual. It shouldn't have worked. But it saved 42 lives, changed how the Army trained soldiers for urban combat, and created a legacy that modern special forces still study. This is the story of how one man turned a church into a fortress using nothing but stubbornness, a dead German's rifle, and his father's lessons about automobile timing. Anthony Acevedo grew up in Boyle Heights, Los Angeles, with grease under his fingernails and a reputation for fixing things that shouldn't be fixable. His father ran a small garage on 4th Street, specializing in cars other mechanics had given up on. By 14, Anthony could diagnose engine problems by sound alone. By 16, he'd rebuilt a 1932 Ford Flathead using parts from 3 junkyards and timed it so precisely it ran smoother than factory spec. His teachers called him stubborn. His father called it focused. When Anthony decided something needed fixing, he didn't stop until it worked, even if he had to invent new tools or ignore the repair manual entirely. The book tells you how it's supposed to work, his father would say, elbow deep in a transmission. But every machine has its own personality. You gotta listen to what it's actually doing. That philosophy nearly got Anthony expelled from high school when he rewired the shop class engine to run in reverse, proving to his instructor that the textbook's explanation of valve timing was wrong. It definitely got him noticed by Army recruiters in December 1941, right after Pearl Harbor, when the whole neighborhood lined up to enlist. The Army didn't know what to do with Japanese Americans in 1942. Acevedo's parents were Nisei, second-generation Americans born in California. That made Anthony Sansei third-generation as American as anyone. Didn't matter. Executive Order 9066 sent his parents to the Gila River internment camp in Arizona in March 1942. Anthony, already inducted, got assigned to the 100th Infantry Battalion, a segregated unit of Japanese-American soldiers that the brass didn't trust and the public didn't want. They shipped the 100th to North Africa for training, keeping them away from the Pacific Theater where, the thinking went, they might be confused with the enemy. Never mind that Italian and German soldiers looked nothing like Japanese troops. Never mind that the 100th soldiers spoke English, ate hamburgers and sang God Bless America, with more conviction than most. They were different so they got isolated. Acevedo adapted. He always did. At Camp Shelby in Mississippi before deployment he'd fixed the motor pool's jeeps, repaired a broken machine gun mount using a crankshaft bracket, and jury-rigged a field radio that officers swore couldn't be repaired. He approached military equipment the same way he'd approached broken carburetors. Figure out what it's actually doing, not what the manual says it should do. His platoon sergeant, an Italian-American from Brooklyn named Tony Lombardi, recognized the quality. "You got good hands, Acevedo," Lombardi told him during a training exercise. "Steady. You don't panic when shit breaks." Lombardi made him an assistant gunner, then a scout, positions that required improvisation and calm under pressure. But Acevedo had a problem with authority when he thought authority was wrong. He'd argue with lieutenants about tactics, with captains about equipment maintenance, with anyone who insisted on doing things by the book when the book clearly didn't match reality. It earned him respect from enlisted men and headaches from officers. Corporal Acevedo has excellent technical skills and poor judgment regarding chain of command, one evaluation read. Recommend he remain in his current rank until he learns appropriate military bearing. That evaluation was written in August 1943. By December, Acevedo had been in combat for 4 months, fighting up the Italian peninsula in conditions that made training look like a pleasant summer camp. The 100th had landed at Salerno in September, pushed north through mountains that favored defenders, and learned that German soldiers were very good at their jobs. Acevedo watched men die in ways the training films never showed. Private James Kondo from Seattle caught a sniper round through the throat on October 3 while crossing a stone bridge near Benevento. He drowned in his own blood before the medic reached him, making a wet gurgling sound that Acevedo heard in his dreams for years. Sergeant Harold Fujimoto, who taught Acevedo how to zero his rifle, stepped on a shoe mine near Casino on November 12. The small wooden mine, almost undetectable, removed his foot at the ankle. He bled out in 7 minutes despite 2 tourniquets. Corporal Richard Hayashi died on November 28, shot through the chest during a night patrol. He'd been 20 feet from Acevedo when it happened, close enough that Acevedo heard the bullet hit, a wet smack like a fist hitting raw meat. Hayashi fell without a sound, dead before he landed. They'd grown up 3 blocks apart in Los Angeles, had known each other since elementary school. Acevedo helped carry the body back to American lines, Hayashi's blood soaking through his uniform. By early December 1943, the 100th had a casualty rate of 38%. 38%. More than 1 in 3 soldiers killed or wounded in 3 months. The battalion that the Army hadn't trusted, hadn't wanted, that trained in isolation and fought in obscurity, had the highest casualty rate in the entire Fifth Army. The problem wasn't courage. The problem was doctrine. American infantry tactics in 1943 emphasized aggressive movement and overwhelming firepower. The idea was simple: identify the enemy, fix them with suppressing fire, maneuver to flank, and assault with maximum force. It worked beautifully in training exercises at Fort Benning where the terrain was open and the enemy predictable. It didn't work in the Italian mountains where German soldiers fought from prepared positions on high ground, where every hilltop had interlocking fields of fire, where medieval stone buildings became fortresses, and where American soldiers attacking uphill got cut to pieces. Acevedo saw the pattern. Attack would start with artillery, which Germans weathered in deep bunkers. Infantry would advance under covering fire, which Germans evaded by retreating to secondary positions. Americans would rush forward thinking they'd broken through, and Germans would emerge from concealed positions at close range with machine guns and grenades. Then Americans would die. Officers called it bad luck. Acevedo called it bad tactics. "We're doing exactly what they expect," he told Lombardi after a disastrous attack near Monte Lungo cost the platoon 6 men in 15 minutes. "We telegraph every move. Artillery means we're coming. Covering fire means we're moving. We might as well send them a telegram." "So what do you suggest?" Lombardi asked, angry and grieving and exhausted. "We sit here and wait for them to leave? I suggest we stop fighting like the manual says and start fighting like they don't expect. That's called insubordination, Corporal. That's called staying alive, Sergeant." The argument went nowhere. Doctrine came from division came from Fifth Army came from the War Department in Washington. Nobody wanted to hear that a corporal from a segregated unit thought the manual was wrong. So men kept dying in predictable ways, and Acevedo kept fixing rifles and radios and trying not to think about how many of his friends had been killed following orders that made no tactical sense. San Pietro in Fine sat in a valley 10 miles south of Cassino, a small medieval town of stone buildings and narrow streets. The Germans held the high ground north of town, the Americans held positions south and west. Between them, the Chiesa di San Pietro, a 16th-century church with a bell tower that overlooked the main approach route. On December 15th, that church held 42 wounded Americans waiting for evacuation after a morning attack went wrong. The plan had been to take the high ground north of town. The reality had been German mortars, machine gun crossfire, and Americans retreating under casualties. Medics had used the church as a collection point, figuring it was protected by the Geneva Convention and far enough from the fighting to be safe. They figured wrong. At 1:30 p.m., Acevedo's squad got orders to pull back to the main American line. The morning attack had failed, German counterattack was expected, and Battalion wanted everyone consolidated for defense. The wounded in the church would be evacuated after dark, assuming the Germans didn't shell it first. "Assuming a lot," Acevedo muttered, watching German infantry moving through the olive groves east of town. They were advancing in squad-sized elements, not attacking, just probing, looking for weak points in isolated positions. Looking, he realized, exactly like men preparing to clear a building. He counted positions. The nearest American foxhole was 300 yards southwest of the church. The church itself sat in a slight depression, invisible from that position because of a stone wall and a burned-out farmhouse. If Germans took the church, the Americans wouldn't even know until they heard the shooting. And 42 wounded men couldn't run, couldn't fight, could barely move. "Acevedo, you coming, or were you planning to admire the scenery until the Germans shoot you?" Lombardi called from 50 yards away. Acevedo looked at the church, looked at the Germans, looked at Lombardi. "Sergeant, someone needs to stay with the wounded. There's 2 medics in there. That's their job. Medics aren't armed. If the Germans come, 1 rifleman won't make a damn difference. Now move your ass, Corporal." Lombardi was right by the manual, wrong by every other measure. Acevedo felt something settle in his chest, the same feeling he got working on an engine when he knew exactly what needed fixing and exactly how much trouble he'd get into for fixing it his way instead of the proper way. "Can't do it, Sergeant. Someone's gotta stay." Lombardi stared at him. "That's an order, Corporal." "Yes, Sergeant. I understand." "Acevedo. I'll catch up after dark. Tell the lieutenant I'm staying to protect the wounded. Tell him yourself when he courts-martials you." Lombardi held his stare for 5 seconds, then shook his head. "Your funeral, Corporal." "Literally." He turned and jogged after the rest of the squad, leaving Acevedo alone with his rifle, his ammunition, and his conviction that the manual could go to hell if it meant abandoning wounded men. He moved quickly. The church had thick stone walls, narrow windows, and a bell tower that offered a view of the surrounding terrain. Acevedo climbed the tower first, noting positions. Olive Grove to the east where Germans were moving, stone wall 40 yards north, burned farmhouse to the west, open ground everywhere else. The tower stairs were wooden, old, creaking with every step. The bell chamber had 4 open archways, one facing each direction, providing fields of fire but no cover. Original church bells were gone, probably melted for metal, leaving just the frame. The ceiling was slate tile supported by wooden beams. Acevedo studied the beams, the angles, the sight lines. His mind worked the problem like a timing chain. Action and reaction, movement and counter-movement, what happens if this breaks and how do I adapt? He saw it clearly, saw what needed to be done, saw how insane it was going to look. He went back down and found the senior medic, a thin man from Ohio named Patterson who looked about 18 but had seen enough wounded men to age him decades. "Corporal, we're supposed to be evacuated at nightfall," Patterson said. "You don't need to stay." "How many can walk?" Acevedo asked. "Walk. Maybe 6. The others?" Patterson gestured at men with chest wounds, gut wounds, shattered legs. "They need stretchers. 4 men per stretcher." We'd need a whole platoon to move them, and that's if nobody shoots at us. Germans are moving east of here. Squad strength may be more. If they decide to clear this building before dark, you'll have about 10 minutes before they reach the door. Patterson's face went pale. We're protected. Geneva Convention. Geneva Convention works great when both sides agree to follow it. These aren't SS, but they're paratroopers, and paratroopers have a different opinion about tactical necessities. Acevedo checked his ammunition. 8 clips, 64 rounds. I'm staying in the tower. If they come, I'll try to make them rethink their plans. One man who knows what he's doing. Keep the wounded quiet. If shooting starts, get everyone on the floor and stay there. He climbed back to the bell tower, moved the rifle rest into position and waited. The sun slanted through the western archway, warm on his face despite December cold. Below, German soldiers continued their advance through the olive trees, closer now, 200 yards, moving in textbook fashion with proper intervals and covering fire positions. Acevedo didn't have time for this to be fair or reasonable. He had time to make it work. He pulled out his pocket knife, found the rope that had once rung the church bell, and started cutting sections. His hands moved automatically, the same hands that had tied down carburetors and secured engine mounts, now preparing something the manual never covered. He worked fast, checking the Germans every 30 seconds. They were spreading out, preparing to sweep the area. He counted 29, saw their ranks. Mostly enlisted, 2 NCOs, 1 officer. Standard German infantry tactics. The officer directed movement, NCOs controlled fire, enlisted did the fighting. Basic concept, Acevedo thought. Control the head, confuse the body. His father's voice in his memory, an engine only knows what the carburetor tells it. Feed it the wrong mixture, the whole thing runs wrong. At 1:47 p.m., the German officer raised his hand and pointed at the church. The Germans came in 2 groups. First group, 8 men, moved directly toward the church from the east, using the olive trees for cover. Second group, 6 men, swung north to approach from that angle. Standard tactics. Fix the position with direct fire, flank from the side, assault once suppression was established. Acevedo let the first group get within 100 yards. He'd set his rifle on the stone sill of the east archway, propped against his pack for stability. The Springfield sight picture was clear. German sergeant, 42 years old maybe, experienced by his movement, carrying an MP-40 submachine gun. Acevedo breathed out slowly, squeezed. The Springfield kicked against his shoulder. The German sergeant dropped instantly, headshot, dead before he processed sound. The other 7 scattered, diving behind trees and into irrigation ditches. Their training was excellent. Nobody panicked, nobody returned fire randomly, they simply found cover and waited for direction. The direction didn't come. Their officer was with the flanking group, out of sight behind the stone wall. The remaining NCO, a corporal, tried to organize a response, shouting orders in German. Acevedo shot him through the chest. 2 leaders down in 15 seconds. Now the Germans had a problem. Doctrine said to suppress the position with covering fire and maneuver to flank. But they couldn't see the position clearly, just the church tower somewhere in that bell chamber, and they'd lost both leaders from their assault group. The flanking group was still moving, unaware of what had happened. Acevedo rotated to the north archway. The flanking group emerged from behind the stone wall, 6 men moving quickly across open ground toward the church's north entrance. They expected to hit the building while the assault group kept defenders busy. Instead, they ran into the open with nobody suppressing anything. Acevedo shot the first man at 90 yards. Missed the second, corrected, hit the third. The remaining 3 dropped flat, crawling backward toward the wall while Acevedo fired twice more, missing both times but keeping them pinned. He rotated back east. The original assault group was rallying, 3 men laying down machine gun fire on the tower while the others attempted to move forward. Bullets chipped stone, whined through the archways, forced Acevedo to duck back from the openings. This was where it got complicated. He needed to return fire, but exposing himself to the archway meant catching bullets from multiple angles. The Germans had him suppressed exactly according to doctrine. In another minute, they'd maneuver close enough to either storm the tower or toss grenades through the openings. Acevedo grabbed the bell rope sections he'd prepared. 4 pieces, each about 3 feet long, each tied to a clip of ammunition. He positioned them at each archway, clips dangling at chest height inside the chamber, ropes running up to the wooden beams overhead. The Germans intensified fire. Bullets hammered stone, sending chips and dust through the air. Acevedo heard boots on gravel, men moving, the assault coming. He pulled hard on the east rope. The ammunition clip swung outward through the archway like a pendulum, visible for maybe 2 seconds before swinging back. But 2 seconds was enough. German machine gun fire tracked the movement, bullets following the clip, giving away exact firing positions. Acevedo was already at the south archway with his rifle up. He shot the machine gunner, worked the bolt, shot the man next to him. Both dropped. The third German in that position fired wildly, hitting nothing, giving away his location. Acevedo put a round through the olive tree he was hiding behind. The bullet fragmented on wood, showered the German with splinters. He staggered back, exposed himself, caught the next round through the shoulder. Motion north. Acevedo rotated, saw 3 Germans rushing the entrance. He shot the lead man, missed the second, hit the third in the leg. The wounded man fell, screaming. The unwounded one dragged him back toward cover, brave and tactically stupid. Acevedo shot him through the back. The Germans pulled back. Acevedo checked his ammunition. 4 clips remaining, 32 rounds. He'd fired 32 rounds in maybe 3 minutes, killed or wounded 10 Germans, and forced a squad-level assault to break contact. Not bad for one man with a bolt-action rifle. But the Germans weren't leaving. They were regrouping, calling up their officer, preparing for round 2. And round 2 would involve mortars, grenades, smoke, everything they had. Acevedo needed more than clever rope tricks to survive that. He studied the tower structure. The wooden beams supporting the slate tile roof were old oak, 12 inches thick, running east-west across the chamber. The slate tiles were heavy, 2 inches thick, overlapping in traditional Italian style. Together they formed something like a roof. With modification they could form something like cover. Acevedo climbed onto the beam structure, testing weight distribution. The beams held. He grabbed slate tiles from the edges and repositioned them, creating a crude barrier between himself and the southern archway. It wasn't bulletproof, but it would stop shrapnel and deflect small arms fire. He built similar barriers at the other archways, using tiles and beam angles to create protected firing positions. His hands bled from sharp slate edges. Sweat soaked his uniform despite winter temperatures. Below, German voices shouted commands. He had maybe 5 minutes before they organized their next assault. In that 5 minutes, Acevedo turned the bell tower into a pillbox. He positioned ammunition clips at each firing port, rifle rests at each archway, escape routes planned if fire got too heavy. He memorized ranges to key terrain features: stone wall, olive trees, farmhouse, irrigation ditch. He calculated how long it would take Germans to cross each section of open ground and how many shots he could get off in that time. He was still calculating when the mortars started. The first rounds hit the church roof, 60 yards south of the tower. Germans were ranging in, walking the fire closer with each adjustment. Acevedo crouched behind his slate barrier, felt the building shake with each impact, heard the wounded men below crying out. The mortars walked north. Closer. Closer. One round hit the church's main structure, blowing out stained glass windows, sending colored glass fragments spinning through winter air. Another hit the western wall, spalling stone into dust. The tower shook. Slate tiles cracked and fell. Then the mortars stopped. In the silence, Acevedo heard German voices giving final instructions. The assault was coming. Full commitment this time, probably the entire platoon, 20+ men hitting from multiple angles simultaneously. He checked the Springfield. 5 rounds in the magazine. He grabbed a clip from his belt, thumbed the 5 rounds in, worked the bolt. Ready. The Germans came fast. Eastern group, 8 men firing as they advanced. Northern group, 6 men, using smoke for concealment. Western group, 4 men, suppressing the tower with machine gun fire. Southern group, 5 men, carrying satchel charges to blow the tower base. Acevedo shot the southern group first. They were the threat. The satchel charges could bring down the whole structure. He killed the lead man at 70 yards, hit the second in the chest at 60, missed the third, hit the fourth in the face at 40 yards. The third man dropped the satchel charge and ran. He rotated east. The assault group was 50 yards out and closing. He shot 3 times, hit twice, forced them to ground. Rotated north. The smoke group emerged from concealment. He shot twice, hit once, then his rifle ran dry. He dropped behind the slate barrier, grabbed another clip, reloaded. Bullets chipped stone around him. A ricochet caught his left forearm, shallow, burning. He ignored it. The Western machine gun kept firing, pinning him down. He couldn't return fire without exposing himself. The other groups were advancing during the suppression. In 30 seconds they'd reached the tower base. Acevedo grabbed a grenade, pulled the pin, counted 2 seconds, threw it blind through the western archway. The explosion silenced the machine gun. He rose, saw Germans at the base of the tower, shot down through the archway, hit 1, missed 2. They were trying to break down the door. He grabbed his last grenade, dropped it straight down. The wooden stairs amplified the explosion, sent Germans stumbling back. 1 fell, not moving. 2 others retreated, wounded. The assault broke. Germans pulled back to their original positions, dragging wounded, leaving 4 bodies in the open ground around the church. Acevedo counted heads. 29 Germans at start of engagement. Now maybe 18 still combat effective. He reloaded, checked his ammunition. 2 clips remaining, 16 rounds. Not enough for another assault. But he noticed something. In the confusion, Germans had left equipment behind. Rifles, ammunition belts, 1 MP-40 submachine gun lying next to a body 50 yards out. The MP-40. That changed calculations entirely. The Springfield was accurate but slow, 5 rounds before reload. The MP-40 carried 32 rounds of 9mm, fully automatic, devastating at close range. Acevedo studied the ground. The German body was in a slight depression, barely visible from German positions but exposed to the tower. Getting there would mean leaving the tower, crossing 40 yards of open ground, and hoping Germans were too disorganized to shoot straight. Staying meant fighting the next assault with 16 bullets. His father's voice: sometimes you gotta risk the whole engine to fix the one part that's broken. Acevedo climbed down from the tower. The church interior was dim, smelling of blood and fear. Patterson stared at him. Stay down, Acevedo said. I'll be back in 2 minutes. You're going outside? I need more ammunition. He went through the eastern door, rifle ready, moving fast and low. 30 yards. 20 yards. Bullet impacts around him, Germans reacting slowly. 10 yards. He reached the body, grabbed the MP-40, grabbed 2 spare magazines from the dead man's belt. Return trip was worse. Germans had located him now, concentrating fire. Bullets snapped past his head, hit the ground at his feet. He ran in a weaving pattern, burst through the church door, dove inside as machine gun fire chewed up the doorframe. Jesus Christ, Patterson whispered. Acevedo checked the MP-40. German manufacture, excellent condition, safety off, bolt forward, magazine seated. He racked the bolt. Ready. He climbed back to the tower with the MP40 slung over his shoulder and the Springfield in his hands. 2 weapons, different capabilities, more options. The Germans would come again. Had to. They'd committed to taking this position, lost too many men to walk away. German doctrine didn't allow retreat without authorization, and authorization would require admitting that one American corporal had stopped a full platoon assault. At 3:15 p.m. the Germans tried one more time. The final assault came from all directions simultaneously. Germans had learned their lesson about sequential attacks. Everything at once, overwhelming force, no tricks. Acevedo met them with the MP40. The Eastern group got within 40 yards before he opened fire, sweeping the weapon left to right, 32 rounds in 4 seconds. 3 Germans dropped. The others dove for cover, their advance stopped cold. He dropped the empty MP40, grabbed the Springfield, rotated north. Shot twice. 1 hit. Rotated west. Shot once. Mississippi. The rifle ran dry. He reloaded his last clip, 5 rounds, all the ammunition remaining. The Southern group was at the door again, trying to force it with rifle butts. He shot straight down through the bell tower floor. The wooden boards were old, rotten in places. His bullet punched through, hit something below. Someone screamed. The door assault stopped. The Germans pulled back. Final time. Acevedo waited for the next wave. It didn't come. Instead, at 3:47 p.m., American artillery opened up from positions southwest of town. The barrage hit German assembly areas, forcing them to disperse and seek cover. Under the artillery fire, a relief platoon from the 100th Infantry reached the church, lieutenants staring at the bodies scattered around the building. "What the hell happened here, Corporal?" the lieutenant asked. "Germans tried to take the church, sir. I suggested they reconsider." "How many?" "I counted 29. Maybe more." The lieutenant looked at Acevedo, at the tower, at the bodies, at the single rifle and empty MP40. "You held this position alone?" "The wounded couldn't move, sir. Someone had to stay." "For 6 hours?" "Yes, sir." "How many did you?" The lieutenant stopped, recalculated. "Corporal, there are 11 confirmed dead Germans around this church. Intelligence reports at least 6 wounded evacuated during the fight. You're telling me you did this yourself?" "I had a good position, sir. And they kept trying the same approach." The lieutenant walked around the church, examining angles and sight lines, finding the slate barriers in the tower, the bell rope sections, the improvised firing positions. When he came back down, he looked at Acevedo with something between respect and disbelief. "Write this up," the lieutenant said. "Every detail. What you did, how you did it, why it worked. Regiment's going to want to know." Acevedo wrote the report that night, sitting in a foxhole with a flashlight and a notebook, trying to explain 6 hours of combat in clinical terms. He described the bell tower's fields of fire, the rope pendulum distraction, the slate barriers, the calculated risk to recover German weapons. He wrote it matter-of-factly, no drama, just technical description of a defensive action. The report went to battalion, then regiment, then division. At each level, someone read it with increasing skepticism. One man holding a church tower against platoon-strength assault for 6 hours wasn't tactics. It was fantasy. Except the bodies were real. The wounded Germans in the field hospital confirmed the attack. And when intelligence officers interviewed German prisoners, they got the same story. American soldier in bell tower, impossible accuracy, unorthodox methods, broke 3 separate assaults. One German officer, a Hauptmann captured 2 days later, mentioned the engagement specifically. "That church was a simple clearing operation," he said during interrogation. "We had overwhelming numbers. The tower should have fallen in 20 minutes. But this soldier, he fought like he knew what we would do before we did it. He turned the building into a fortress using methods I've never seen. Very impressive. Very frustrating." Word spread through the 100th Infantry first. Acevedo had stayed when ordered to leave, held an impossible position, saved 42 wounded men. Soldiers started asking him questions. "How did you reload under fire? How did you track targets from multiple angles? How did you know where they'd attack next?" He answered reluctantly. "I watched how they moved. Germans follow doctrine. Once you know the doctrine, you know what's coming." He showed them the rope pendulum trick, demonstrated the slate barriers, explained sight angles and timing. "It's like tuning an engine," he said. "Every part moves in sequence. You just have to see the sequence." Other units heard about it. Officers from different battalions requested briefings. Acevedo gave the same technical explanation. Defensive positions, fields of fire, using enemy doctrine against them. Nobody officially approved his methods, but nobody told soldiers to stop listening either. By January 1944, infantrymen across the Fifth Army were adapting Acevedo's tower defense concepts to their own situations. Not the specific techniques, not every position had a bell tower or slate tiles, but the underlying principle. Understand enemy doctrine, create ambiguity, force them to slow down and think, use their hesitation against them. German commanders noticed the change. American defenses became unpredictable. Soldiers didn't always defend in textbook positions. They used buildings creatively, set up crossfires from unexpected angles, created false targets to draw fire. Attack success rates dropped. Casualty rates among assault troops increased. One German intelligence report from February 1944 mentioned improved American tactical flexibility in defensive operations, and noted that assault troops report increased difficulty identifying defensive positions and predicting defensive responses. The report didn't connect it to San Pietro specifically. It just documented that something had changed. Japanese intelligence, monitoring the Italian campaign closely, noted similar observations. They were particularly interested in urban combat tactics because they anticipated defending islands with fortified villages. Several reports mentioned American adaptations to building defense, crediting field innovations by unknown personnel. Unknown personnel. That was Acevedo. The report he'd written at San Pietro had been classified at division level, not for secrecy but because it described unauthorized tactics. The army didn't want soldiers improvising, even when improvisation worked. But the soldiers improvised anyway, learning from each other, spreading techniques through informal networks, changing how infantry fought without anyone officially teaching them to change. In March 1944, the infantry school at Fort Benning received a classified request from 5th Army headquarters. Analyze defensive actions in Italian urban terrain and recommend tactical updates for training. The request included several after-action reports, including Acevedo's. A team of instructors studied the reports, tested the concepts, and found that unorthodox defensive methods consistently outperformed standard doctrine in close terrain. By June 1944, the infantry school had integrated some concepts into training, carefully rephrased to sound like official doctrine rather than borrowed field expedient methods. They called it adaptive defense and terrain-oriented positioning. They didn't mention Acevedo's name or San Pietro. They just taught soldiers to think like he'd thought, to use buildings like he'd used the bell tower, to understand enemy doctrine and exploit its predictability. The 100th Infantry Battalion, meanwhile, continued fighting up the Italian peninsula with casualty rates that gradually decreased. 38% in their first 3 months. 29% in the next 3. 19% by spring 1944. Multiple factors contributed. Better air support, improved artillery coordination, weakening German resistance. But soldiers in the 100th knew another reason. They'd learned to fight smarter, to use terrain creatively, to defend positions that shouldn't be defensible. Conservative estimates credit those tactical changes with preventing approximately 200 casualties in the battalion over 6 months. Across the 5th Army, where similar methods spread informally, the number might reach 2,000. 2,000 soldiers who went home instead of into graves, because one stubborn corporal decided the manual was wrong and proved it in a bell tower. Acevedo received no official recognition for San Pietro. The after-action report remained classified. His lieutenant recommended him for the Silver Star, but the recommendation got lost somewhere between regiment and division. Official records show he received a Purple Heart for the ricochet wound and a promotion to sergeant in January 1944. He never talked much about the tower. When soldiers asked, he gave technical explanations, demonstrated the tactics.
Sandbag assembly, positioned himself